Hi, this is John from Remotify.io. Following on from our overview video, in this tutorial we're going to be looking at modes in Control Surface Studio. A mode is a group into which every other mapping in your script is placed inside. Only one mode can be active at a time, and you can switch the active mode. You can think of modes like pages in a book. Each page contains a list of mappings. You can turn the page and see a new list of mappings. Let's see this in action. In my script, I'll click the Add button and the mapping menu displays. In the mapping menu, you can see that only the mode mapping type is available to add. Opening up the hierarchy of the mapping menu, you can see that the mode mapping type is the parent of all other mapping types. I'll add a mode to my script. Now I'll click on the Modes Add button, and in the mapping menu which has opened, you can see that mode is no longer selectable, but all of its child mapping types now are. Next I will add a metronome mapping type. After clicking it, a new metronome mapping is now added as a child of my mode. This means that the metronome mapping will be in mode 1. Let's change the name of this mode to metronome mode. I'll now install this update of the script and reload live. When live reloads, watch the status bar at the bottom. It tells us that our metronome mode activated when the script initialized. And if I press button 1 on my controller, the metronome turns on and off. I'll now add a second mode to the script by clicking on the script's Add button again and selecting Mode. I'll name this mode Navigation Mode. Inside this mode, I'll add a highlight navigation mapping and set it to button 1, which is the same input as our metronome button. This mapping will move Live's track highlight to track 4 when I press it. So we now have two mappings which are assigned to button 1 on our controller. But as they are inside different modes, they won't be active at the same time. Instead of the metronome mode activating when the script first initializes, I want to have the navigation mode activate. I can do this by clicking on the mode icon and dragging it above the metronome mode. Now if I click install and go back to live, when I reload the session, the status bar tells us that navigation mode is activated. And if I press button 1 on my controller, the track highlight moves to track 4, which is what I have configured in my navigation mode. So how can you change the active mode? This is done with a mode selector mapping type. I'll add one to the navigation mode by clicking its Add button and choosing Mode Selector. I'll need another button, so I'll quickly add a second one to my controller. I'll set the mode selector's controller input to use button 2, and I'll leave the first menu set to select mode. If I open the second menu, there are currently 3 options. I want it to activate metronome mode when I press it. I will also add a mode selector to the metronome mode. For this, I want it to activate the navigation mode when I press it, and I'll set it to button 2 on my controller. Now, I'll install this update and reload live. Navigation mode is activated immediately, as that's the first mode in our script. Now watch the status bar when I press button 2 on the controller. This tells us that navigation mode has been removed and metronome is now active. So if we look at our script in Control Surface Studio, the contents of metronome mode are now available to use. And if I click button 1, the metronome should turn on and off. As button 2 in metronome mode is also assigned to a mode selector mapping, if I click it, the active mode will change to navigation mode, and clicking button 1 will move the track highlight to track 4. If we look at our mode selector mapping, There is another option called Previous Mode. If we use this option, when the mapping fires in Ableton Live, it will reactivate whichever mode was active before this one. Why is this useful? Well, let's say we only want our metronome mode to be active while our mode selector button is pressed down. When we release the button, it should go back to the navigation mode. Just like a shift button, mappings inside our metronome mode would become our shifted controls. So let's do this by first changing the name of the mode to shift mode. In the shift mode's mode selector mapping, we change select mode to select previous mode. We don't need to change anything for our navigation mode's mode selector mapping. When we press the button down, shift mode will be activated. Now here's the magic part. We now want our mode selector to fire when we release the button, so we'll need to change the velocity value which will be used to fire it. To do this, we change control to custom, keep control type set as on/off, change the on value to be 0 and off to 127. So now this mapping will fire when it receives a velocity of 0 from the input, which, if we check our input's default on/off settings, is the default off value. I'll install this update and reload my live session. When I press the mode selector button down, it immediately activates the shift mode. And as the mode selector in shift mode is waiting for a velocity value of 0, when I release the button, it receives the 0 value and switches the active mode to the previous mode. I'll do it again. I press the mode activator, shift mode activates. With the mode selector button still pressed down, if I click button 1, the metronome turned on and off, which is our mapping inside the shift mode. And when I release button 2, it switches back to navigation mode. And pressing button 1 moves the track highlight to track 4. So why use the previous mode option instead of selecting a specific mode? Yes, you could just use a specific mode and it will always activate that mode. But if you want to use the shift mode along with 2 or more other modes, the shift mode will always switch back to the mode that you accessed the shift mode from. For example, if I add a third mode, which also has a mode selector mapping for activating the shift mode, when the shift mode's mode activation button fires, it will revert back to whichever mode I accessed the shift mode from. You can also scroll through all available modes with a knob or encoder. To do this, in the mode selector of each mode, change the first menu to scroll. The second menu disappears. I'm now going to use knob 1 on my controller as the input. Each mode needs to have a mode selector mapping set to scroll for knob 1. If a mode doesn't have it, then when you land on that mode, scrolling will just stop. I'll add this to each mode and install it into Live. When I turn my knob, you can see in the status bar that each mode is being activated in turn, and the order they are in inside the script manager are the order on the knob. So if I reorder them, reinstall the script and switch back to Live, when I turn the knob, you can see that the activation order matches the script. That's it for our mode tutorial. If you found this useful, please like it and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth tutorials on Control Surface Studio.